Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of FreeThought Hour. Now, as you know, I have a co-host who has recently been upgraded to a co-pilot, but I'm afraid I need my co-pilot space for another person. And so I'm going to take her down for a little while, only on Monday, so that I can train another co-pilot. But here she is anyway, in semi-darkness. Tercia.
Hello, John.
How the devil?
How the devil am I?
Yeah, how the devil?
Well, I have partial light. I'm sharing my the space with my husband who's busy working. So shame he has to tolerate my voice in his ear. But I'm doing very well, thank you. And
if he's not used to it by now.
He can shut off completely. He can just sort of white noise, white noise.
Okay.
Yeah, but about the co-pilot thing, I'm not much of a pilot. I hope I'm a better host than I am a pilot. I've got so many irons and so many fires that I really don't mind not being co-pilot. I'm fine with you being pilot, but I do enjoy being co-host. So don't axe me from that, please.
No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't dare. But especially as on this occasion, you've done the fishing and caught us a nice fish, haven't you? So shall we introduce Mariette? How the devil are you, Mariette?
Hi, I'm good, thanks, and you?
Good. Yes, we're okay, thank you. So the thing that appeals to me about you, Mariette, is that you're an archaeologist. And we haven't had an archaeologist for a couple of years. And he was very much a sort of a metropolitan archaeologist. When they dug a hole in a town for any, communication purpose or transport purpose, he's had a lot of work in London because they've been putting new tube lines through. He was the one who looked to see what relics there could be found and decided whether or not they could go ahead. Do you do anything like that, or are you more rural? I don't know.
No, that would fall more in the realms of what we call CRM archaeologists. So it's cultural resource management as a specific field that archaeologists can specialize in. They have to have a lot of knowledge about our national heritage laws. They're basically field archaeologists. They have to be able to read the landscape, go in wherever there's potential for development. They go in and assess the area and check if there's anything of cultural or historical or archaeological significance.
Yeah.
I'm not involved with that facet of archaeology. I have a few colleagues who are involved. And yes, it's, sometimes you find interesting sites that no one knew about, and all of a sudden, someone needs to put up a power line, or there's a new mining development or residential development, and then they get called in and discover some potentially unknown sites. Yes,
I expect you heard that we discovered Richard III's bones underneath a car park near was it Leicester or Lincoln? I think it was near Lincoln.
All that I can think of, I don't know how well you know Blackadder, but
yes, I love
there's one there. Oh dear, Richard III.
Yeah.
I wonder if they said those exact lines.
So tell us what you do, because I noticed in your CV there's a biblical reference there. You've been to the Holy Lands or something. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I haven't had the privilege. To give you a bit of background on my field, I'm in ancient Near Eastern studies. So that's a very broad discipline. It does include some studies into the Holy Land. Of course, ancient Egypt is one of the main focus areas if you're doing ancient Near Eastern studies. And then you have biblical archaeology, which is a sister discipline, but it's much more focused on the Holy Land. So I have quite a few colleagues who have been to the Holy Land, and they've done a lot of excavations in Israel. Two of my colleagues have recently returned from a 3-week-long excavation on Tel Hatzor. But yes, I haven't had the privilege of going yet. My area of expertise is more in terms of technical analysis of museum objects. So,
right. So these are things that have already been found, and you are categorizing them or collating them or
Yes.
identifying.
Yeah, what I did for my doctoral thesis is I looked at a number of objects from the Titsong National Museum of Cultural History, which is here in Pretoria. It's one of our national holding institutes for archaeological collections and historical objects. And what often happens in archaeology and with museums is objects often get donated to museums without necessarily having a proper record of where they were excavated, where they came
Yes.
from.
Yes.
A lot
Yes.
of objects were actually come from private collectors.
Yes. Yes.
Then pass away, and then their families aren't interested in having these objects anymore, and they
Yes.
get donated to museums, which means
Yes.
we don't have the provenance of the objects.
Yes. Yes.
So my study looked at objects that had an uncertain provenance, and through technical analysis, comparative stylistic analysis, I was able to compare these objects with known and dated objects in online museum collections. And I also did 3D imaging on them at
Yes.
the
Yes.
Nuclear Energy Corporation in near Hartbeespoort Dam. So I had actually did 3D scanning on the objects, got 3D models, got some insight into some internal anomalies, clues towards the item's production, which can,
Yep.
if you go down the rabbit hole and you look at all these physical clues, and you get some idea of production techniques, which gives you a relative idea of the date range of when these artifacts were made.
But you can date pottery radiometrically, can't you? Anyway.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah.
So
and of course,
I was going to say, would you like to tell us a bit about that? Because I don't think our audience would be expert in it.
yes,
John,
well,
Mariette, just be warned that it can't be old, and nothing can be older than about 6,000 years.
oh yes,
true?
of course.
Yes.
Yeah. I like the argument that a lot of people who debate the age of the Earth then say, but dinosaurs can't be millions of years old because radiocarbon dating is not very accurate. It's like, yes, radiocarbon dating is not at all accurate on fossils. Things like that.
Yes.
So yeah, unfortunately, I'm also not an expert in ceramic dating. A lot of what we as archaeologists do it's quite broad. I mean, you have to be a little bit of a jack of all trades, but then you have people who really go into a specialized field like ceramic analysis and ceramic dating. So I can't speak much about that. But of course, it is very interesting looking at ceramics when you look at ceramic typology as well, what the shape of a vessel can tell you, for example, about its use, about its purpose, why it was made in a certain way. And then residue analysis is something I also haven't worked with personally, but I find that also to be a fascinating field, just to look at the residues on a ceramic vessel and then discover it was used for cooking pop or making beer or holding olive oil, animal fats, anything that can leave a trace on the surface of your ceramic. It can be analyzed.
Yes, that's interesting because, as Tertia has just indicated, we encounter quite a lot of people who are deeply theistic and who believe the mythologies of books like the Bible as utterly veracious. Is that a word? Veracity. Give me a word, Tertia. True. True is the word, isn't it?
True, inerrant.
Okay.
All those things.
The thing is that they want to use archaeology to prove events.
Mm.
I always go back to them and say, well, archaeology is a great science. It's very good for proving, well, for demonstrating, don't like to use the word proof at all, really, for demonstrating that what civilizations created, products that they made, manufactured many thousands of years ago, like we've been talking about pots and things and other artifacts. But archaeology is not very good at saying what happened at 11 o'clock on Thursday, the whatever date, because those sorts of things don't leave any traces. So you won't find any archaeological proof of virgin birth or walking on water or rising from the dead, because, you know, there's nothing that persists after those events have happened.
Yes, that is very true. Yeah. And I mean, it's sorry,
Mariette, no, I wanted to ask you about the idea that I had as a 12-year-old about archaeology, and it connecting obviously very strongly to history. And when you talk about things like radiometric dating, then to what extent has archaeology moved into physics and chemistry, and that type of thing, and how in terms of training archaeologists, how important is that very let's call it science, the hard sciences, how important is that in training modern archaeologists?
It is quite important, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily essential in terms of archaeological training, like in terms of your career as a student, going to university and going to study. Just to start off, there are two basic like branches that you can pursue when you're doing a degree in archaeology. Either you can do a science, more science orientated degree, and then you can do a more humanities orientated degree. So with me studying through UNISA, UNISA's Department of Archaeology is more humanities orientated. So it's not as much focused on hard sciences. It, of course, is still very important. Whereas if you go and study, for example, at a university like the University of Pretoria or UCT, they have a more science-orientated, like physical science-orientated approach to teaching archaeology. So it depends very much where you study, and then, of course, what your personal interests are. So when you then go on and you continue with honors or masters or doctorate, and you start to specialize in your own, your own interest as a researcher and academic, and you get into the more hardcore science things. Even then, when you start to, let's say, for example, maybe do lipid analysis, or you are working with different radiometric dating techniques, it's usually you still have to collaborate with scientists.
Yes.
As archaeologists ourselves, I mean, we don't do the radiocarbon dating ourselves. We ensure that the samples that we take in the field are taken correctly, that it's as free from contamination as possible, and then we go and we collaborate and we take it to someone at a lab, let's say at the CSIR, for example, or at some of the labs at University of Pretoria is a good example. They have very great collaborative projects between the archaeology students and faculty and the physical science and chemistry departments. So there's a lot of collaboration that goes into these scientific endeavors. Like, for example, with myself, with my own research as well, I went to Nexa. I had the objects I got from the museum. We put them in the scanner, and there's a radiographer that is professionally trained in setting up the machine and setting up the parameters and putting in all the settings and making sure that it works, and showing you how to use the software and showing you how to compile all the data, showing you what to look for visually when you're doing these like 3D models and stuff, and looking inside objects and how to basically read the data through the software. So it really is a huge collaborative effort between archaeologists and
Wow.
the scientists.
But I didn't know that so it's actually possible to do radiometric dating in South Africa, at least certain types of it?
I'm not sure. I think there used to be. I know that we used to do our radiocarbon dating at the CSIR. I'm not sure. I think the scientist that used to be there, who used to focus particularly on helping archaeologists, I'm not sure if he's still there. But yes, I'm not exactly sure of like the whole range of different dating techniques and scientific analyses that we can do. But a lot of people are surprised when they actually hear what we can do in South Africa. Is we're actually quite well equipped. But the government really, to their credit, puts a lot of money into science and research and development. So yes, kudos to the government on at least that.
John, I'm sorry, I have to steal a little bit of thunder, because South Africa, it seems, is more and more being established as the cradle of humankind. So I want to ask two questions, and not only as a South African, but I think this is of international importance. Which sites in South Africa do you see as the most important? And I want to ask you about three in particular. So the first one is the Blombos caves at Mossel Bay. I don't know if you've ever been there. I've never been. I've been close to, but I've never actually visited the actual site. And the second one is not Mapungubwe. Is it Mapungubwe? Mapungubwe Hill? Yes, it is Mapungubwe.
With the famous golden rhino, yes.
The golden rhino, yes. And then, of course, although this is not, it didn't used to be, at least, archaeology as much as it was paleoanthropology, but it seems that the cave system at Sterkfontein is more and more showing that the early hominids were tool makers, and to what extent does that where's the crossover between paleoanthropology and archaeology? Three very big questions. So let's do the first one about the three important sites that I know of, archaeological sites, and then that touches upon what is the crossover between where does archaeology end and paleoanthropology or paleoarchaeology? Is there such a thing? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Okay.
Well, before you do, Mariette, I'm going to give you some thinking time, because I'm going to take issue with Tercia over South Africa being the cradle of mankind.
Okay, humankind.
Okay, not sexist. Non-sexist mankind. Okay. Woke mankind. So I'm going to disagree with that anyway, because I think it's the East African Rift Valley.
Okay, so you can be the judge and adjudicate this one, or maybe not. Maybe we need somebody like David Orenstein.
This is on the cusp, though, isn't it? This is bordering between archaeology and paleontology.
Well, that's what I want to get to.
Well, okay. I think let's start off with number one, because otherwise I'm going to. I've made a little list, so otherwise I might get sidetracked and forget one and focus on the other. Yes, Blombos Cave, of course. It's as if that site just keeps on producing, and it really is. I mean, when you're talking about the Stone Age and early Stone Age, and just the wealth of information that we get about our early human ancestors. You know, if we look at the first recorded evidence of decorative motifs on ochre, and if you look at the first examples of ornaments as jewelry, the expression of self, I think, is something that's, whenever you get asked the question, what makes us human, I think that is one of the most important, focus areas, is when do we start expressing ourselves as humans? When do we start burying people in a respectful manner? When can you start seeing ritual activity? And Blombos Cave is just one of those sites that it's almost like it's this
for
candy box.
those of our listeners, I just want to say Blombos is dated about 80,000 years ago, if I'm remember correctly. Please correct me if I'm to be corrected.
It's within that range, but I mean I think also I'm not exactly also certain about the dates, but they keep on pushing, they keep on going further down, they keep on discovering more. So when we're going to actually reach the bottom, and like at what date range we're actually going to max out on a site like Blombos, I guess at this stage is anybody's guess, because it
deeper actually does mean older in a lot of cases, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, there are, if you look at like what I mentioned now about the earliest expression of like individuality, that we can say, okay, this is anatomically modern human behavior, is to kind of maybe circumnavigate Mapungubwe for a second and go to the cave systems in Sterkfontein with the Rising Star project that I think by now is like everyone probably knows about. Anyone who's interested in our early human origins are going to know about the Rising Star project. And I don't know if any of you have watched the Cave of Bones documentary on Netflix.
I watched it on Thursday night, and
it
John,
is incredible.
I don't think I watched it maybe it was subconsciously communicated to me by the universe, but I was absolutely stunned, because it's now been, I wouldn't say conclusively, but I think there's a very, very strong probability that the Homo naledi were doing burial rituals, and that there was tool use, and that there was they were doing pictographs on the cave system wall, and that's between 200 to 300,000 years ago. And to me, when I watched that documentary, so for those who are interested, please don't miss it. It's on Unknown on Netflix, and it's called Cave of Bones. And it's I'm still thinking about it, because the implications of Homo naledi doing that, and the type of evidence for what they were doing, it just boggles my mind.
Yeah, and I think with the Homo naledi, the questions of whether it is actually evidence of, some of our earliest evidence of purposeful burial. It was disputed in the beginning, because there is, of course, with a cave system like this, the possibility that carnivores might drag, bits of Homo naledi into the cave system, and that it's not necessarily evidence of burials. They could be washed down. I mean, archaeological sites, sometimes they do get contaminated by surface objects that get washed into your layers. There is some possibility of disturbance. So the main counter arguments against purposeful burial was that it was probably natural causes, wash down, predator activity, and so on. But now that they're actually, I mean, if you watch that documentary, it's really quite convincing, because a heap of bones on its own doesn't necessarily say it's a burial. But if you look at the surrounding soil, there's clearly a disturbance. There's clearly an oval, almost like an oval shaped disturbance in the soil around the bones. And that's, of course, one thing that we as archaeologists look for, is changes in soil texture and in soil color.
Yes.
And there's that change in color and soil type.
Yes.
Then it becomes compelling.
Signs of a pit that's been filled in.
Yes. And of course, the associated, what appears to be a scraper tool that was, if I remember correctly, included in one of the grave pits. I can't remember if it was included in the grave pit or was it part of the rest of the excavation. But
no, this was what actually was so amazing, and I'd love to. So this documentary was made in 2022, so it's very recent, and the most conclusive so far evidence to my mind is they discovered this fossilized baby, as a child, it's about 30, so the width of my arm, so I'm not that big a person, and they actually encased it in gypsum, and they extracted the whole block. So they didn't actually take this fossil from the surroundings, rock or soil, whatever it was encased in, and in that encased in that gypsum, plaster of Paris, they took it to this lab in France, and they did this extensive X-ray scanning. So if you and I were to have that type of X-ray scanning, we'd be dead coming out. And they do very exact 3D modeling. And inside the hand of this child was this piece of rock that, from all the evidence, it looks like a scraper tool. And it wasn't with the hand like sort of lying next to it. It was just like, I don't know if you can see, but it was literally curled up and holding it against the chest like this. And I don't think there was no mention that they've actually taken that fossil out of the rock. I think it's still encased like that because it's probably so priceless.
Would that be something that you would be able to do with your 3D imaging?
Yes. Nexa does host a number of international researchers who do archaeological and paleontological work in South Africa, who take fossil samples. A lot of them are still encased in the surrounding stone. And unfortunately, the issue with this is it's too large. The sample that was taken from Sterkfontein was too large because the facilities at Nexa, you're only allowed, I think, at the most about a 30 centimeter by 30 centimeter squared block of material that you can scan. Yes. So, and of course, Tertia, to get back to your question, you're not certain of whether they've actually now excavated the fossil from the enclosed rock. Is the question in this instance is why would you need to? If those 3D images are so detailed, why would you want to take it apart? And there's actually no reason.
There's no reason for it.
It's like a lot of mummies that come from ancient Egypt. It's like you don't want to risk unwrapping the mummy and causing damage and exposing the internal material to air and to humidity and moisture. Fossils are a slightly different case, but there's always a risk of when you're removing this fossil from the surrounding stone. It takes time, it takes resources. That's one of the things as well, as we don't necessarily in our museums and our universities have people who can sit for weeks and carve out fossils because there's no funding and
and we have the technology now, so why do it? We don't have to be destructive.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So I've got a couple of questions which are, because I try to keep an eye on what's developing, in the field of science and technology. And it's come to my attention that there's been a recent discovery, not analyzing DNA, but analyzing the protein in a tooth. I think the thinking goes that DNA is rather volatile, isn't the right word. It's rather
unstable.
That's a good word.
Perfect.
Yes, and so it doesn't last so long, but proteins are a bit more robust. And so if they can analyze proteins from deep time, I think this particular sample is from the tooth of a human about 80,000 years old, and they've been able to diagnose that it was a cross between a Denisovan and a Neanderthal. Have you picked up on that?
I haven't picked up on that, no. But I think something that's come to light in recent years is, of course, that that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens also
Yes.
were much more engaging. Let's put it like that. So much more
Yes.
engaging than we previously thought, and that if you in the past, if you called someone a Neanderthal, it was a bit of an insult. But I think these days, if you get
It's actually true.
if you call someone a Neanderthal these days, it's maybe not that much of an insult, because
No, because
the Neanderthals were much more advanced and a lot smarter than we imagined.
Yeah.
Excuse my cat.
sure. Yeah.
Oh, mine, I just chased mine out because mine is completely and utterly crazy. I've got 4, so only one is completely crazy. The others are just a little bit crazy.
Well, I don't have any, so you can have as many as you like. So the thing is that although proteins are coming into use as a dating material, there's always a limit to how useful these types of substance are. So you have to be lucky to find a large enough sample to do anything with, and that's another sort of bone of contention that Tertia and I meet with these people who believe in the literal Bible, because they think that because we haven't discovered all the ducks in a row yet, therefore their God must have done it, you know? But
I get equally frustrated with people like that, because it's, when you compare science with religion, is science can say we don't know everything, and we can change our minds, because whenever we get new data, we're able to say, okay, let's backtrack a little bit, and let's reanalyze, let's reassess, let's admit we were wrong, but it's not because we were not purposefully wrong, and we can admit we're wrong, and we can take new data and we can change our minds. Whereas religion, on the other hand, is quite stagnant, in that this is how it happened, and you've got to have faith, and you've got to believe that this is how it happened. But that's not, according to me, that's not quite how the world works. And it's a very limiting, if you think about it, it's a very limiting, religion is actually very limiting in terms of really looking at the wonder of our universe and just the pure dumb luck of our existence, but at the same time, how absolutely fantastic it is and how much there is to learn and explore. Whereas religion is like, and this is kind of it. We were created 7,000 years ago. And
it's a cultural difference, isn't it? Because whereas in science we see the ability to admit that you're wrong and to change your mind. In fact, it's only when we discover that our ideas were wrong that we can be absolutely sure of anything, because when we're claiming that things are right, we don't know what inconsistent observation we might make tomorrow, so we can never be absolutely sure about how right we were, but we can be sure when we're wrong. So we in science, and I'm an ex-science teacher, so I count me in that group, we actually celebrate being wrong. We think of it as a strength, whereas in the religious mindset, it's a weakness, admitting that you're wrong. You've got to defend against anybody who tries to point out that you're wrong and criticizes. So it's a very different mindset.
Yes, no, definitely.
The other thing I wanted to talk about, being a topical thing, is there was an arrowhead discovered recently, and it was pre-Iron Age, but it was made of iron, and the conclusion is it must have been made of meteorite iron. So early man had access to iron as a hard material for making objects out of before we'd worked out how to extract it from its ores. Isn't that interesting?
And I mean, it's not the first time in human history and archaeology that we have, as humans, used extraterrestrial
Mm,
materials to make things. So
mm,
it's really
Mm.
interesting. And it's
mm.
also, that the ancient people were very practical.
Yes.
Like if you found something and you weren't quite sure what it was or where it came from, but it had the mechanical properties.
Mm,
If you're going to bash it against another rock and it makes a sharp flake, and you're like, okay, well, I don't know what this is. It's sent
But
from
it
the
works.
gods
Yeah.
and it works. Yes,
yes.
exactly.
And it's come from heaven.
It's come from heaven.
Yes.
Yes.
Um, John, are you familiar with that old South African film? Uh, the gods must be crazy. Are you familiar with that film?
No.
Oh dear, maybe it's because in those days South Africa wasn't the most popular country in the world, but it's worth a watch. It's the storyline very briefly. It's about somebody who flies in a light plane over the Namib Desert and tosses out a Coke bottle, a tiny Coke bottle, and by some miracle, it lands on soft sand and it doesn't break. And this little bushman picks it up, and how this bottle is such a useful tool for rolling and carrying things in liquids, and it ends up that it causes conflict in their community because there's only one of it, and everybody wants it, and then they start fighting, and then the tribe decides that this object of which there's only one, that was initially seen as a gift by the gods, must be returned to the gods. And this little bushman goes on a trek to find the end of the world so that he can throw it off the end of the world to give it back to the gods. And it's on YouTube. It's an old movie, and it's actually a comedy, but the concept is seen from the point of view of what I've learned about humans and pre-human ancestors and non-human pre-human ancestors.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. So watch it. The gods must be crazy.
Is it in Afrikaans or is it?
There's actually on YouTube there's a dubbed version.
Oh,
It's not as good as the Afrikaans one because the American accent just doesn't work, but it's still, you can follow, you can watch it. Yeah.
The gods must be crazy. Okay, I'm putting that up.
That's crazy. Mariette, I see we're running on to almost 40 minutes, and I want to ask you about another aspect of archaeology before we go along. So I always dreamed about becoming an archaeologist, but I grew up in a small rural town in northern KZN, and I was destined to go to Potchefstroom University because I was in the Gereformeerde Kerk, and I didn't even consider, I mean, Cape Town wasn't part of South Africa. It's too far away. If you grow up in a middle-class family in rural northern KZN, I mean, really, Cape Town is the other side of the world. And Pretoria was where the devil lived.
I think he still stays here.
Oh, okay. Is he still there?
Yeah.
So Tukkies, where my husband where my husband studied, that was not a university for a goeie gereformeerde meisie to attend. And the only
much too much FreeThought.
Absolutely. No,
Victoria can't be allowed to think for yourself.
Absolutely. And at Wits, the University of the Witwatersrand, I mean, that was communist and the devil lived there.
And English. Don't forget
English. So
with Tikkies, you were still, Afrikaans. You could still go and study in Afrikaans at Tikkies, but Wits was from the devil.
And the communists. It was communist, English, and the devil. So, I mean, it was really, you didn't go there. In fact, you didn't say Wits. But so the end of matters.
Do you want us to come back and take control again and stop all this nonsense?
It's not like that anymore, fortunately.
We've still got gunboats,
But in any case, so I ended up not even pursuing a career in archaeology because it wasn't offered at the university that I was destined to attend. But I've always been fascinated by history. But I think, I have a suspicion that one of the reasons that you are a keen partaker of violent sports in your spare time is because you've learned that archaeology is actually not like Indiana Jones, and it's mostly sitting in an office doing boring field lab work and very little field work. So talk to us a little bit about what archaeology really entails as a day-to-day job, and secondly, your love for war games. Is that what you call it? What do you do?
Yes. War games is a quite succinct description. Yes, to speak about the the pop culture, very much pop culture interpretation of archaeology, the Indiana Jones, the Lara Croft, all of these adventure stereotypes of archaeology is misleading. Look, there's a good dose of adventure when you go and you've heard about a site, for example, and you've now encountered mentions of a site in archives, and you've seen some historic photographs, but you're not quite sure where the site is. Then there's a healthy dose of exploration and adventure, and you get to meet new people, you get to engage with the communities and get their insights and find out if they know anything about sites. But there's no fighting commies, no
free thinking people.
Yes, and you do get I'd just like to show you. You do get the stereotypical Indiana Jones hats.
Right.
Okay.
Which, John, this might interest you, but I was in the UK in July, and we went to that big country and outdoor expo. And I got myself a nice new leather hat.
It's very nice. Yes.
Yes. So healthy dose of adventure, yes, but like you mentioned, Tisha, a lot of what we do as archaeologists is actually desk-based research. So we spend a lot of time going onto Google Earth, for example, and checking out an area, and going into you used to go into Pretoria Central, into the maps office, and you get to your topographical maps, and you have to study your environment. You'd have to look at what would have attracted people to a particular location if you think that there was a settlement. So a lot of desktop research, lots of archival research. Sorry, it's just my cat opening my closet. It's not a ghost. It's not a ghost. It's just a cat.
Coming for you.
What a shame. That would be a first. I would love that.
That would have been we would have had to add an hour onto the show if we had to do a ghost investigation. But a lot of misconception. We do field work, but usually if that's about 10% of our time, we're lucky, because it is expensive to go out into the field. There's a lot of logistics. There's your cat now, Tisha.
This is Picasso.
Oh, hello.
This is the crazy one. Kijk, de willen kijk over die mensen.
Hello, Picasso.
So what I want to ask is, because not a million miles away from where Tertiary is, I don't know where you are exactly, Mariette, but I know that Tertiary is within fairly easy reach of what is it? The area where the square kilometer array is being built. What do you call that part of the world?
Sutherland.
Yeah.
Sutherland in the Great Group.
Yeah, and it occurs to me that sort of development, that sort of going on, is going to be disturbing the ground, and this is an opportunity, possibly, for archaeologists to go rooting around to find out if there's any relics. Is that the case?
I'm not entirely sure about Sutherland. I think that particular area has been explored, and I think they have done the necessary environmental impact and archaeological impact assessments in that area. But what is happening now, interestingly, as an unforeseen knock-on effect of our energy crisis, is a lot of mines are now investing in solar farms. So a lot of land that was previously not necessarily earmarked for development, because the mines used to get reliable energy from Eskom, is they now have to start providing for themselves. And solar farms, if you have to think about how much space a solar farm needs to take up in order to power a mine, it's extensive ground that needs to be surveyed to check what the environmental impact of solar farms would be. And so there's a lot of sites being discovered. South Africa really has a rich archaeological heritage. A lot of undiscovered sites, a lot of smaller settlements that we didn't even know about, both from pre-colonial and colonial times. So yes, an unexpected knock-on of our energy crisis, knock-on effect.
Always look on the bright side of life.
Monty Python reference.
Yes.
Absolutely. And if you don't know that, we're not your friend.
No. No. Now, our archaeological sites are usually, if there's the whole time Blackadder, Monty Python, Big Bang Theory, like we throw pop culture references around like crazy.
Yeah, my favorite at the moment is Young Sheldon.
Oh, I haven't watched that yet.
Oh, you should, because it's Sheldon as a 9-year-old, a Noel of a 9-year-old. You should watch it. It's really funny, and it's layered, so it will appeal to other 9-year-olds who see him as a bossy kid. But then we adults get all sorts of other references that are buried in the script. It's really worth watching.
Yeah, I like that type of comedy and animation as well. One of my all-time favorites is SpongeBob SquarePants, because the amount of hidden adult humor in SpongeBob was what kept me enthralled for much of my early 20s. It's like, is this show really for kids?
I think they imagine, the makers of these shows imagine that it's going to be watched by mothers with babies on their lap. So it's got to have the dual appeal.
Yes,
that's true. Mariette, what's the most interesting site that you've personally worked on or visited?
Well, I must say I don't want to brag about our own site. It's Eastfort in Pretoria, and I'll give a bit of a description now of the site.
Okay.
Is a lot of people think that archaeology is about the big and grandiose discoveries, the golden rhinos, or if you think about Anglo-Saxon hordes or Viking hordes, you think about these. Yes. Or I recall from one of my colleagues who excavated, I can't remember at which of the sites in Israel they excavated, but it was at the end of their dig season. And they had just uncovered the lip of a ceramic vessel, and they knew it was their last day. And they just cleared some of the topmost layers of dirt surrounding the lip on the the internal cavity of and it was a vessel filled with silver coins.
Oh.
And they had to, because it's the end of the season, they basically had to say, okay, well, this is going to take us days to excavate properly.
Yes.
It's a huge vessel. It's basically, you close it up, you leave it there, you put
come back a year later. Yes. Oh,
and then you wait.
The suspense of waiting for the time to go by, because of course you have to get permission from the government to do this work these days.
Okay. That's why I didn't become an archaeologist, because I would not have been able to wait.
Yeah, and it's not just with a site like that, you'd almost have whoever's the dig director, whoever's in charge in an excavation like that, you would always almost have almost by default permission to excavate. So because it's such a important site, there's so much research that's generated. So permission is not the issue, but I think logistics is, because you don't necessarily have money to stay longer, you don't necessarily have the people to help you excavate. But to get back to what is the the most interesting site I've ever worked on, and the most interesting find. So it's often the small things, the small things that we jump up and down over that other people would like, you're going crazy over a button. But at East Fort, which, to give you a bit of background, it's a redoubt, which is a small, like we jokingly call it IKEA forts, because what happened during the Anglo-Boer War is the Boers built 4 large stone fortifications around Pretoria to defend its main positions.
Yeah.
And when the British basically waltzed into Pretoria without a shot even being fired, because when it came to actually defending the forts, the Boers were like, no, we're not going to bother coming to Pretoria. It's a bit of a schlep. We're going to stay in Klerksdorp. So the British basically walked into Pretoria without a shot being fired. But then they were, of course, afraid that the Boers would come back. So they had to now fortify some of the other strategic positions.
Yeah.
So they had these pop-up forts, which we call IKEA forts, because they had basically a few wagons full of material, and they had to work according to the landscape.
Flat packed.
Sorry, say again.
Flat packed forts.
Yes. It's like, hey, your Amazon delivery is here. Ding dong.
Yes.
And okay, now you've got your material, build your fort. So these forts were constructed on strategic positions, and we have General Rice, who designed this basically bulletproof system of walling, where you had your foundation stones, and then you had 2 pieces of corrugated iron, and then in between the 2 pieces of corrugated iron, you would fill it up with small stones. So effectively, you're making a bulletproof enclosure. So we know that the British were on the site. We've got some good archival evidence of them being on the site, of course. We've got historic photographs of when they were busy constructing the fort, so we have a basic idea of the layout. Some basic surveys were done in the 70s, and we started excavating in 2013. So 2 years ago, we came across a button, a uniform button with a cannon insignia on.
I want it back. It was my ancestors.
You can put in a claim, and if you successfully get past our dig director,
the Greeks want their marbles back. I want that button.
You can have a photo. I'll send you a photo.
Thank you.
So this, like doing some archival research now on the button design, actually linked the regiment that was on East Fort, which was the Scottish Royal Artillery. And we actually have a photograph of them on site with a huge 9-inch naval gun that was positioned on top of that kopje.
Wow,
and so we have the photo of the cannon, and we can determine from looking at the landscape, like standing more or less where the photograph was taken, looking at the surrounding landscape, the profile of the mountains in the background, we could, with 90% certainty, say that this cannon was on this site. But with this button, with the cannon insignia on it, we definitely know that it was the Scottish Royal Artillery on the site. So everyone went ape, I won't swear family friendly, but they went bananas over a button. And then last year, I don't know if we were in the news a little bit last year of what we found on site, is when we were busy excavating part of the stone walling of what we believe to be the officers' barracks. I was actually busy with that area of the excavation, and I was excavating, and I got, like, I saw a piece of metal, and they did use like structural bits of metal that we believe they used when they were busy constructing the walls. So we do find metal in the walls, almost like droppers, or and it's like, but this is big. This is something big. And I kept on carefully excavating and going down, and it's odd. It doesn't look like something structural. And I go down about this far, and I get a cross guard, and I jump up, and I run to our dig director, Prof. Anton van Vollenhoven, and I'm like, Anton, we've got some type of knife or dagger embedded in the wall.
Oh.
Come and look.
Mm.
So he rushes over, and from what we can determine then from the shape of the handle, and we excavated about this bit further to just make certain that underneath the crossguard there's a blade.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a bayonet that they
Oh.
used to attach to their
Yeah.
rifles.
Yeah.
And it's just now we have to halt this area of the excavation because none of us on our team have the expertise to actually properly excavate this bayonet.
Ah.
Fortunately, we have Heidi Fivers, who's one of our colleagues. She did a course. She has a qualification in restoration, but she's
Mm-hmm.
also very adept at field conservation, in conserving the objects in the soil,
Yes.
consolidating the material using a special blend of chemicals.
Yes.
For example, with it being metal, it was quite flaky, so you had to
Yes.
consolidate the surface
Yes.
before you can
Yes.
then very gingerly excavate it.
Yeah. Corrosion has been happening. Yes.
Yes, yes. So of course this was very interesting in it just being a bayonet, right? And then towards the bottom edge, towards the tip of the bayonet, we found an unopened, what we believe, according to comparing the shape of the container to what we know historically was produced during that time, unopened tin of condensed milk.
Oh my goodness.
So of course, archaeologists being archaeologists, we had a whole array of theories of what this could be. Someone said
Yes.
it was a booby trap, because there was a piece of wire as well, that it was a booby trap, like someone wanted to steal the condensed milk and then the bayonet would jump up and stab the person. That's crazy. We have a lot of fun on site, and we all know it's not serious, and we joke around about it. But what we then found what is most our likely explanation is that, and we still find this as a military tradition when they erect structures, is to put something that is associated with the regiment that is stationed on the site or helped with its construction in some of the foundation walling. They would put objects. So this is, because it is also the theory that maybe it was lost, like it dropped, but it's very unlikely that it dropped exactly in panel like that and next to a tin of condensed milk, which that's highly improbable that would be accidental.
Yeah.
And the British were also so pedantic about record keeping and about supplies that if you had lost your bayonet and you got back into Pretoria Central and you had to account for all your equipment, you would go back to Eastfort and you would go and find that bayonet.
Yes.
And it's not damaged. Also, it's not. It doesn't look like something that was discarded. Like, okay, let's just poke, just put this in a wall and leave it there.
Yeah. Well, here's a couple of points. Here's a couple of thoughts. I'm bouncing off that because back in those days there were no can openers. Can openers hadn't been invented. There were cans for many years before there were can openers, and they had devil's own job of trying to open them with knives and probably bayonets as well. But the other thought that springs to mind is sometimes people deliberately bury something as a sign of the time. I forget what this is called. A sign of the times, in the expectation that way in the future it may be dug up and be of interest to those ancestors.
A time capsule.
Descendants. Those descendants.
Yes.
So what did you call it?
A time capsule.
That's it. Yes, a time capsule. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if any one of those soldiers who was stationed at Eastfort ever imagined that 120 years later people would be on that site jumping up and down and losing their minds. I mean, it's and we were also fortunate enough. Sorry, just one last bit on Eastfort.
Okay.
Is what we envisaged when we started the project is for it to be a public engagement project. Is we want to involve not just consulting with the community, but involving people with the actual excavation process. Members of the public who are interested in archaeology, whether you're a young person who's interested in studying archaeology one day as a career, if you're in high school or like starting off at university, whether you are retired and you're interested in archaeology, anyone can join us on site. And this is just a wonderful thing, and it delivered results, because one year when we were on site and we had an open day and people from the surrounding community could come up and visit us on site, someone came there, I kid you not, with a diary and said,
"Oh, right.
This is from one of the soldiers who was stationed at Eastfort during the Boer War."
Yes.
Now, of course, the person gives all kinds of details in this diary about his day past, that he went into town, and his girlfriend sent him a letter, and all kinds of consequential. Why didn't he give us some information on this structure? We would like to have had a little blueprint or a sketch of, with notes of what the different. No, it was.
Yeah.
But why would anybody do that? That's not interesting. I mean, you know what the place looked like. Why would you make a drawing of a place that you know exactly what it looks like?
But exactly, that's unfortunately you wouldn't necessarily make notes on what brand of gin you had on site.
We all have our own priorities, and at the age a soldier is, it's probably quite different from thinking in terms of future archaeologists.
Yeah.
So on that note, because we've slightly overrun, I'm going to draw the proceedings to a close, in which case this show will then become immediately a time capsule for the future.
Nice.
So thank you very much, Mariette. Thank you
very much.
Thank you, viewers, and future viewers too. And next week, we've got another interesting person who's, what is he called? This one, I think, is, he's a former atheist who went into hospital to have an operation and came out a Christian. So we'll be talking to him next week. Okay. Thank you very much, guys and girls.
Thank you for the invite. It was really nice chatting to you.
It was fun, wasn't it?
For your time. Stay on for about 2 seconds afterwards.
Okay.
Say bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.